Okay. All right, so this is going to be the demo for rigging props, and I have 3 props that I've incorporated into this rig: the hair, or afro, the megaphone, and then the sunglasses. I'm not going to do all 3. I'll just do the megaphone. But it's pretty much the same concept. In fact, the megaphone's a little bit harder because the glasses and the hair, for the most part, they're just going to follow the head con. I could, if I wanted to animate them separately, or maybe have the hair. I'm doing this completely wrong. You don't want to grab the hair geometry and animate it. I would create, if I wanted to do that, I would create a separate con that I would grab and animate that. And let's say the wind got really gusty and maybe the glasses blew off his face. I wouldn't just grab the glasses and animate them off his face. I would create a separate control handle just for the glasses so that I could animate that. So again, this is basically what I'm going to do, but I'm going to go into the graph editor real quick. I'm sorry, not the graph editor, the hypergraph, and I'm going to delete this stuff. So you guys with hopefully your thesis, not your thesis, but your primitive theater projects are simple enough that as long as you stay organized with layers, properly naming stuff and keeping track of what's on what layer, and then naming everything properly, you guys should probably be able to bring everything into one file. And it's really important. As you can see, this rig was built right on the 000 point of origin, right on the middle of the whole scene. I didn't build a character over here, and that's going to be really important for rigging. If you did build a character, it's not. Yeah, this one's already. If you built a character over here, oops, what the heck? I broke my rig. I don't know what I did. You know what? I'm going to open this up again because this one's busted. But what I was saying, if you build a character off to the side, you need to freeze its transformation. You need to move it to the middle and freeze its transformations, because rigging needs to happen from, there we go. Rigging needs to happen from the center. So, this guy was over here. You can see that I'm not selecting my mesh. I'm actually selecting my control handle, which is exactly what I want. I can hit 0 and he goes back to the origin. All of our characters are going to start at this origin point, and we're going to key them at our safety, what we call a safety frame. So we're going to select everything on that rig and key it there. But it has to be in the right default position at 000. Okay, so back to our demonstration for today. This is I'm going to bring in this megaphone. So you guys probably didn't have to model your stuff in other files. One thing I did notice though is, and I forgot about this, I should have brought this up. If you have issues with your model, that maybe it's doing something strange, like I can't remember whose it was. I think it might have been the other class. There's a student who was modeling his pawn and the edge loops stopped working. He would use the edge loop tool and it wouldn't create it. It would just make a vertices all the way around, but it wouldn't put an edge loop there. So I had him select the mesh, go to File, Export Selection, and he exported that out. And he gave it just a simple name like pawn. He didn't put first initial, last name, all that stuff, just simple pawn. And then when he went into that file, he opened up that file called pawn, which is what I'm going to do now. I'm going to go, not the pawn file, but I'm going to go import. You know what, let me open this up in a different window. So he opened up that pawn that had the issue, and because for some reason when you export an object in Maya into a new scene, it does some cleanup work. And so we found that he was actually able to use the edge loop tool again. There was some glitch that was messed up in the first file. He exported his geometry to a new file, and in the new file it worked. So plus if you're building all of your characters and your scenes and everything in one file, it starts to get a little bit messy. And you don't have to do what I'm doing, but because I'm working from a much bigger project, I'm just going to show you this example as soon as the other version of Maya opens up. Oh, come on, Maya. There's. I guess it's having a hard time because I'm sharing my screen and I'm recording, and anyways, hopefully it'll be okay. I'm not going to spend a lot of time in this other scene. So also make sure your projects are set up properly with some in primitive theater scenes, and then where'd it go? I don't know what it was. I created a megaphone. I thought I called it M phone. Huh. Anyways, just forget that. I would have just brought that. My point was I was going to bring that megaphone into this. I was going to import that megaphone into this file. So I'll just start from here. So here's my megaphone, and it was probably closer to, or it was, there wasn't any rotations on it. It was facing forward, and I'm just eyeballing this now because I had already positioned it for what I wanted. But let's just say that's good enough. So, but then it was also at the center. So this, all the channel box stuff was all in the default positions. So it was all frozen transformations. So when I import it, this is where it would be. And actually the one that I brought in was huge because I built it at a different scale. It was like that. So I just had to scale it down until I got it to the size that I wanted. And of course I already froze transformations. So a couple of things to think about for something that you're going to move. Like this guy doesn't have hands, but we want to give the impression that he still grabs things or moves things. So I would position this. He's not. I don't always want it to be right in front of his face. Oops. I may have it here on occasion, but for the most part, it's blocking his. Not here, but like right here. I could set that as its default position, but I don't want to leave it there. I want to animate it up to his face. We don't walk around with megaphones in front of our faces. Even if, we're at a protest or something, we're going to set it down or just hold it by our side. We're not going to keep it at our face the whole time. So anyway, so I positioned it in a way that was going to be more convenient for where I normally want to, where I will normally be keeping this. So let's say, yeah, it'll be rotated down and probably to the side, as if he's just letting it, he's holding it in his hand and he's just kind of dangling it there next to him. Something like this. And I'm just gonna look around the perspective view, make sure it's close enough to his body, which it isn't. Maybe pull it in a little bit, but I don't want it to clip. I don't want any clipping. That's getting close there, so I'm gonna pull it out a little bit. So again, if you guys have seen Veggie Tales, they don't really have hands. They just kind of grab stuff and stuff just goes to their face from their hand, where their hand would be or whatever. Maybe I'll rotate it a little bit this way too. A few, something like that. Okay. So this is going to be its new default position for this character. So again, I'm going to modify freeze transformations. The other thing I need to do is, in fact, I should have done this before I moved it, but I can just kind of eyeball it. I need to have the center pivot not right in the middle of the object, but where it's actually going to pivot. So if I have a megaphone in my hand, like if this phone is my megaphone handle, I'm going to grab it here and the megaphone's out here. I'm not going to rotate it from right here. I'm going to rotate it from where my hand is going to move it. So I'll move this, hold down D, and I'm just kind of drag it kind of more or less in a good place. And I need to check around because I already have some rotations on it, and that's going to kind of, actually, that's not too far off. Maybe I'll just leave it there. All right, so that's our geometry. And again, we froze the transformations. If you have any history, unless you're going to do some kind of blend shape where it changes, you can animate it to change into something else. I don't have any history, but just for good measure, you know, just delete history. Make sure it's named properly. Yeah, you could put it on a layer, and I'll call it M phone LYR, megaphone LYR. Okay. So the next step, just like what you guys did, we're going to create a control handle, and we're going to group that control handle, and then we're going to parent our object to the control handle. So I'm going to go to edit. I'm not edit, create. NURBS primitives, circle. All right, and I'm going to do this from the front view because I want to rotate it in a way that it lines up with the megaphone. So first of all, it's too big. I'll scale it down, and then I'll drag it up and over. And this doesn't have to be absolutely perfect. I'm just kind of eyeballing it. But what I'm looking for is I want this to be kind of in line with where I'm going to pivot from, like, his shoulder to get it up to his mouth. That looks pretty good from here, but again, you want to check in all the views. So rotating around. That'll probably do okay. It doesn't have to necessarily be that big. I want to make it big enough so I can easily grab the ring without interfering with the other control handles that are nearby. All right, so that's pretty good. So I'm going to zoom in here, and I need to name this. So I'm going to hit Control C, and I'm going to say Control V, and then I'm going to call it CON. And I'm going to copy all of this stuff, Control C. And then with the MCON selected, Control G to group it. And I'm going to rename that group, Control V, mphone con, or mphone underscore con underscore NULL. And don't forget to also delete the history on the con. So modify freeze transformation, and I'm going to go ahead and delete the history also. Delete by type history. There you go. Okay, so one thing I wanted to point out, the control handle is center pivot is kind of where his waist, on the side of his waist. The con null, and whenever you group something, its center pivot changes to or becomes the point of origin. And that's not really helpful for me in what I'm going to do. So I'm going to change that. But before we do anything with this null, I'm going to check and see that that con is in the right place for me to rotate this. So just a quick check. I'm going to select my child, shift select my parent, and then I let go and I hit P. So now I just want to see if I can get this, where the most convenient place to put the center pivot for my control handle, so I can get the object in position with as few movements as possible. So at his face, so I can rotate it up, rotate it over, and you can see that it's not really getting close to the face. If I'm just rotating it, it's not there. I mean, I could use a W and translate it over this way, and then translate it up, and then translate it forward, but that's a lot more steps. I want to be able to just get a nice fluid arc from where it was resting to his mouth. So to do that, I need to change the center pivot. The center pivot needs to be much higher, for one thing. So I'm going to say front view. I'm going to hold down D and X at the same time and snap it to the grid. And what's kind of convenient, and I probably did this at one point, but this grid intersection lands really nicely on the pawn's neck. So I'm going to use that as my my guidepost. So just to make sure I'm not selecting the geometry, I'm going to turn it off. And then I'm going to reposition the center pivot. So I'm going to hold down D and X at the same time and snap it. Oops, hit Z. Hold down D, hold down X. There we go. So I snap it to that, excuse me, that intersection right around his neck. So I'm going to turn this pawn back on. Now I'm going to test it. Well, before I do, let me check it from the side view. So that looks pretty good, but we'll see how well it works. So what I'm going to do to test this is rotate the con, and if it rotates effectively, where I can maybe in 2 rotations, or 1 would be ideal, but if I can just get this default position up to his face where it's mostly going to be, or where it will be, in just 2 rotations, that's pretty good. So first I'm going to rotate it up, and then I'm going to rotate it in the blue. And it's a little crooked, but I wasn't paying a whole lot of attention to its position when I was going to try to bring it in. I just kind of eyeballed it. So this isn't really that great. If I'm just using rotations, that's too much work. So I would then have to use a translation and pull it closer to his face or whatever. So that's not the right location. So this can get a little bit tricky just because you need to be sure that you're making it easy for the animator to do his job. So, and that's really the mindset of riggers. It's like their number one priority is, what can I do to make this rig easier to use for the animator? So he has to do less animation. And if he has to do less movement, less animation, he can actually end up doing, get more shots. And that's going to help everybody. So they want to keep the animators as busy as possible. Excuse me. All right, so here's my pawn, and I'm going to check my my null. So I already tried well, actually, no, I tried from the center, or from closer off to the side, but it was more or less in the middle. So if I just try from here, that's way too low. So I'm going to go back to the front view, hold down D and X, snap it up, and I'm trying to remember exactly what I did yesterday just to make it easier. I'm gonna lower it just a little bit. So I'm gonna hold down D and just drag it down a little bit. Even though it worked pretty good yesterday from that point, I'm not sure. Excuse me, how this is different. So I'm gonna rotate it up. Oh, you know what? I think I need to go the other direction because I want to get it closer to his face. Right now it's still lower below his neck. So maybe if I dragged it up instead a little bit, and I don't want to go too far. Maybe I'll just go right there. So if I rotate it up and then over, that's pretty good. Of course, this wouldn't be very good visually because we're completely covering his face, but maybe something out here. Also, I still notice that it's too far away from his face. I think I got it in the right, pretty close to the right rotation in blue, but I didn't get it in the right rotation for, what is it? You know, for the side, the x-axis. So I'm going to just, and again, like I said, just trial and error. Maybe I need to rotate this guy a little bit more first down here and then pull it over. And then I'll change the center pivot again. Let's see what that does. Oh, I forgot to freeze transformations. Modify freeze transformations. And over. Yeah, that looks a lot better. Well, it's lined up in front of him. What I'm not doing is checking to make sure that he's, let me go back here, freeze transformation. I'm also going to pull it back a little bit. It's too far forward, I think. So in the left view, I'm going to drag the center pivot back more. In fact, maybe I don't need to go up. Maybe I'll just drag it back a little bit more and then check and see where that lands us. If I drag it up, it's getting closer. I also probably need to just pull it up higher. Maybe I just grab the whole thing and drag it up higher to him. And then I'll change the center pivot again. That was probably too far. So it's just a matter of going back and forth and maybe finding a happy medium, maybe just right there. And then if I rotate it, oops, I gotta freeze the transformations. So every time you change it, you have to freeze the transformations. We're not animating it yet, we're just testing how easy it is to get to his face. So if you have a sword and you're gonna pull a sword out or a big hammer or something, this is exactly the kind of stuff you wanna do to make sure that you're positioning it so that you can easily have it in a default position and then get it up to his face or whatever. Maybe I'll rotate this too down a little bit and freeze transformation, and then I'll rotate this up a little bit better and then freeze that transformation. Now let's see what it does. That's pretty good. I think I over rotated the megaphone. So anyways, you can just keep doing that. But the important thing is that you get a control handle. I parented the child, the prop, to the control handle, and I also made a null node for the control. So the next step would be to parent the null to somewhere in the body. So I'm going to turn my rig back on. Let's see. There we go. And so again, you're asking yourself, when I move the body, do I want if I move it from the chest, do I want the megaphone to follow, or do I only want it to move if he's rotating at the neck, or should I go as low as the waist? So that's entirely up to you. You want to think about what your needs are for your animation and your performance. So I'm just going to say for now, when I move the chest area, I want this to follow. So I'm going to select the chest con and zoom in here. And no, I'm sorry. I'm going to select, sorry, I'm going to go back to the, but this is the parent, the chest. I can make the chest con the parent, but I'm going to select this null and parent it to the chest con. So I shift select the parent, and then I hit P. I let go and I hit P. So now if I grab the chest con and I animate it, it follows. And of course, I probably need to be careful because you can see that it's clipping through his foot when I go down. So he can't go down very far. I could counter animate this back up so it just doesn't go through his foot, but that's not really the ideal place. You want to be able to grab the neck or the chest con and move it without having to worry about that guy. All right. So that's, and again, it's super simple. You guys have already built this. We're just building a little minor rig here and just parenting it to either the chest con or the waist con or the head con. So I'm not going to go through and do it, but you can see the glasses and the afro. They're all parented to the head con. I created a head con. I called it head gear. The stuff on his face and on his head, I call it headgear. So here's the headgear con, and then I have the glasses and the afro. And I could see that this needs, I didn't freeze the transformations on the afro, so I'd go modify, freeze transformations. Yeah, and also make sure that when after you've parented your props to your character, so they follow him, you want to make sure that the control handle for that prop, that absolutely has to be default. Translate XYZ in the rotates, and these guys have to be zeros, and then the scales have to be 1. If you pick up some, sometimes what happens when you parent it to the con null, when you parent it to the rest of the rig, in moving, sometimes the con null picks up values, and that's okay. You don't have to worry about those as long as your control handles, as long as those are default 0, 0, 0, and then for the X, I'm sorry, for the scale you have 1s. That's okay. That's what you're looking for, because that's where when you start animating, these have to be zeroed out. Does anybody have any questions yet? All right, I'm gonna go ahead and pause the video there. Zoom recording. Okay, so this will be the bagel demo. So subdivisions, let's see if I increase those just so it feels a little bit more rounded. And then the height, I'll probably leave those where they were at 20. Radius, actually, let me do the section radius. I think that one needs to get a little bit thicker because sometimes bagels can get pretty tight. There we go. It's like a big fat bagel. Okay. So there's our fluffy bagel. So let's say we're going to cut this in half. First thing I would do is, if I wanted it pretty close to the center, I would probably create just another edge loop like we've been doing. Insert edge loop tool right around here. Actually, I'm going to put it back at 1. So we'll smooth it out when we're finished. But for now, working on it, it's easier to look at when it's in rough mode. As far as I mean, it's harder to look at because it's all faceted, but we don't see all the extra stuff that smooth mode gives us. So I'm going to take this. I'm going to double click. I went to face mode, and then I double clicked on this new face ring around the donut or bagel that I made, and I'm just going to delete that. You can delete faces by using the uh, delete on your keyboard, but you cannot delete edge loops or vertices that way. You have to select them and go up to edit mesh, delete edge vertex. So let me look on the inside because I deleted what's on the outside. So I also need to do the same in here. I need to create another edge loop, insert edge loop, and do the same thing. So I'm going to select these faces. Oops, hit Z. So that is probably one of the reasons a lot of students have issues with modeling is they think they're out of a command and they like I just thought I was done with the edge loop command and I clicked, but I wasn't. So to get out of a command, you have to use the select button and then just select hopefully nothing. It's probably easier to select nothing. And then now I'm out of the command to create edge loops. So I'm going to shift select, double click, and that grabs everything around that the center. And I could have also offset it using the edge loop offset, but this does the same thing. So I'm going to delete that. So now I want to separate this geometry out. I'm going to go to front view. And I'm going to select all these faces. Actually, what this seems, there might be a better way to do this in Blender because I hear that Blender is actually a better modeling tool than Maya. But I'm actually going to take this bagel and duplicate it and then drag it over here, drag the duplicate over. And I'm going to delete the top of this and the bottom of this. So now I have two halves and they're separate pieces of geometry. So let's say they, I don't know, maybe I'll rotate this around 180 so we could look underneath it. Oh, that actually looks like some kind of a baking pan. You would pour your, anyways. So I can see that there's the same number of edges on the outside as there are on the inside because it's perfectly concentric. So what I can do is extrude. I'm going to select edges, double click on the edges around. And when you use the extrude tool, this, again, you have to be careful, but I'm going to say edit mesh, extrude. And this little blue button here, before I use that, if I don't use that and I just pull it in the y-axis according to this here, it's not following the world so much as following the geometry. And sometimes that works okay for you. Like it looks like it's doing a good enough job if I wanted to pull it up. But generally what I do is I use this button and that sets it to the world. That way I know exactly, it's not getting too scaling too much in the wrong axis or whatever. So I would pull it up a little bit and then I would scale it in. And maybe I'll push it down a little bit. Oh, maybe I'll scale it some more. So I'm gonna get pretty close to where this is at because I want them to line up. I don't want to be right on top of it because then it's kind of hard to see. If you leave a little bit of space, it's easier to select stuff. So I'm going to hit 4 and I'm in wireframe. And target weld is essentially snapping one of these edges or vertices to above it. So I'm going to turn on target weld now. So I'm going to mesh tools, target weld. I'm going to go to the options. And you have two different options. You can either use center, which as you see, as I grab one and then drag it to the next one, they snap to the middle, the midpoint of both of them. Or if I use a target, I click on the first one and drag it to the second one. The second one becomes a target and it pulls it up to the target. So let's just say I'm going to use target around this thing. And there's also something called the bridge tool. And that creates geometry within this. It would like, but maybe we'll show that another day. So for target weld, because I know this is perfectly symmetrical, I'm going to snap every other one to its corresponding edge. Oops. And there's another problem. You saw I didn't do it exactly right, so it just snapped it way over here, and that really messes up your geometry. So you want to keep track of it and make sure you're not going too fast and you're being careful about it. So I'm going to snap this guy, this guy. Is this pretty similar to Blender, using the extrusion tool and a target weld?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, it used to be called merge vertex tool, but for some reason they decided target weld is, and that was really frustrating because I was when they versioned up the version that they started calling it target weld, I was still looking for merge vertex tool and I couldn't find it. And they not only named it something different, but they put it in a different location. It used to be like under edit mesh, and now it's under surfaces. So it's just actually it's not under surfaces, it's under mesh tools.
I was working on something the other day in Blender, and I was noticing one of the modifiers they have. It's the weld. So I know
Yeah.
Blender, they've obviously taken a lot of cues from Maya, but I wonder if
Mm-hmm.
Autodesk is starting to take cues from them.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me. So here's my bagel, and it's closed, but and one thing that you want to be sure of is that all of your geometry, you can see all these faces have four sides. You want to make sure that all of your geometry is, we call those polygons, four-sided polygons. If any of these have 5 or 6 or more, it's not going to render properly. It's going to make a mess of your rendering. But even though I have four-sided, I probably want a little bit more geometry. If I wanted to give it more of instead of such a sharp edge, maybe it's a little bumpy. Maybe I used a butter knife to cut it instead of a laser or something. So I'm gonna go back to edge loop, which you guys are familiar with. Oh, actually, you know what? Instead of using edge loop, I'm gonna see if where is it? Offset. I'm gonna show you a different tool. Where is it? Oh, like I said, they move stuff around, so I can't always remember. Anyways, well, I'll just use it. Insert edge loop. So I'm going to drag it out here to the edge. And if I wanted to round it, I can hit W and pull it up a little bit, almost like a bevel. And then since edge loop was my last tool, I hit Y and I can do it again here. And then pull that up, hit W to pull it up. And I'm just going to give myself a little bit more geometry. You generally don't want to see a really long face. So there's the bagel, there's a 1/2. In fact, so I would also delete my history. It's getting kind of long. So maybe instead of doing all that work for this guy, I would just delete this face and just duplicate this guy back over here. And then, yeah. So here's your two sides, and you can add stuff to it, but so that's a really quick and simple example of creating using edge loop. I'm sorry, using extrusion and target welds. Does anyone see how they might be able to use that in their project? Either one of those tools?
Yeah.
Okay, so it didn't happen on mine. I don't think it happened, but one thing that I like to do, and I want to show you guys because this is a good test, you want to make sure that you don't have double faces. So I'm assuming, let me get rid of this guy. I'm assuming that I modeled this properly. And sometimes double faces just happens and we don't even know why it happens, but I have my object selected. I'm going to go to, I've showed you guys how to use the soft select or the sculpt geometry tool. This is how I test if it has double faces. And this seems really counterintuitive because you have this nice, perfect bagel. I'm gonna make my paintbrush a little bit bigger. Actually, I'm gonna leave my opacity pretty high, and I'm gonna use smooth. So I'm gonna smooth this out. And I'm not gonna leave it this way, but I'm just forcing any unwanted geometry to reveal itself. And it looks pretty good. I don't see any, usually if you have double faces, you'll see some of the outer surface will stay and the inner stuff will I'm sorry, the outer surface will be deformed by the sculpt tool, but the inner surface will stay. So in fact, let me do this. Let me, instead of deleting this one, this is just a quick example of what it might look like when you, so you think you have one bagel made, and it's, you know, it's not always going to be the exact same number of faces, but you look at it and it looks right. Maybe it's just the top surface that has double faces and the rest of it is okay. And if you click on it and you see some of these dashed lines, instead of a solid line, you see them dashed. That's one indication, or they look like they're thicker when they're highlighted. That's one, those are a couple of indications that you might have double faces. So again, I would go to, if that was my assumption, I would go to surfaces, sculpt geometry tool, and I put opacity to like half, and then smooth tool, and I just paint on it. And you can see the one that I want is deforming, and the one that I don't want is staying. And for us, this is a fairly simple solution, you know, because these are not double faces. That's just a duplicate, so I can just easily delete that. But if there were double faces, oops, the challenge is you have to go through and either select the face, and this is another thing I do. I select a face, I delete it, and if I can see through underneath, then I know I'm good, and then I just undo that. I select the next one, delete it, and just make sure that I can see. And I've had instances where I've had face on top of face on top of face, and it just, sometimes it's just better to just start it over instead of going through all the headache of trying to clean this up. And you would think that if it's just a model with extra faces, it's not a big deal. You know, you can still animate it. The problem is when you texture it, the texture, the UV, it's going to have all kinds of crazy UV maps. So you don't want faces on top of faces. Do you guys ever have double faces in Blender?
Far too often.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Okay,
I
I didn't
mean,
realize it was that
whenever I
common.
was like, you had taught us how to do the box modeling, and a lot of the tutorials I would follow, I didn't understand how to properly use my perspective mode and front mode. And of course, they told you, like, do this, do this. And I was like, I don't need to do that. So whenever I would be trying to model and extrude, I
Yeah.
would just be deforming that geometry. I wouldn't know, and everything would be layering on top of each other, and it was awful.
Yeah, it can get pretty messy, and that's what's really frustrating for students, especially when they're just starting out. I mean, if you're watching a tutorial, like I'm trying to do a toon shading tutorial, and for my thesis project, and this is actually an Autodesk tutorial on YouTube, and this, it's only like 3 minutes long. So I thought, oh, that seems like a really simple thing to do. So I start following it. I'm following along, doing it as he's doing it, and then he's skipping stuff. There's stuff that I'm supposed to already know how to do, and it's like, wait a minute, how did you get that connection? And so I'm trying to do all kinds of research to figure out how he did it, but yeah, sometimes tutorials aren't the
One
best.
thing, and you know, you're very good about saying exactly what you're doing, but one thing with tutorials that I've noticed that a lot of the YouTubers do, your keystrokes, they can have them displayed on screen. So I bet
Oh,
that
okay.
might even help more because it'll show exactly which buttons you're pressing and your
Yeah, that's
combinations
a
and
good
stuff.
idea. I don't know how to do that, but I can look into that, and just like a bigger cursor or something that.
I mean, your
Um,
cursors are fine, just like showing the keystrokes. Like sometimes, like whenever I first started, I was like, how are they doing that? But then you just look down in the bottom corner, you can see exactly. Because I mean, guys of your skill, you guys can do it so quickly, and it's just motor
yeah,
function at this point.
yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, sometimes I forget that I've done this 50 times and my students have only done this. This is their first time doing it. So I need to slow down sometimes. So does anyone else have anything else you want to see modeled using extrusion or target welds?
Well, I just have a question about
Yeah.
the sculpting tools and
Mhm.
all. How do I adjust the size of the
The brush?
radius of the crosshair? Yeah, the brush.
Yeah, so like if I'm gonna use a sculpt geometry tool, I'll turn that back on. So sometimes when you first start, it's huge and you can't see it. You see these giant crosshairs, or it's too small. So you hold down B as in boy, and sometimes I tap it a couple times to make sure that it does it, because sometimes it starts painting on it and sculpting on it before I get to change the size of the brush. So you can get a bigger or smaller, and I'm still holding down B. I'm just using my left mouse button to change the size. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. That helps a
Mhm.
lot.
Yep. All right. If there aren't any other questions, I'm going to go ahead and stop the video, and then we'll get to the see where you guys are at.
Say that you want cream cheese on the bagel. How would you model that?
Okay. So I would actually I wouldn't model the cream cheese on this itself. I would I would create a separate piece of geometry, especially because well, let's just say okay, let's just, for the sake of the example, let's say I wanted to keep the geometry all together. So instead of using insert edge loop, I mean, I could do that. Actually, let me do it a couple times just to give me a little bit more geometry, because cream cheese is going to be a little bumpy, right? So I'm just giving myself a little bit more geometry. And this is where sculpt geometry comes in really handy. So I'm gonna, so let's say the bagel is, the surface of the bagel is perfectly flat and our cream cheese is gonna be all bumpy. The first thing I'd probably do is give it a little bit of thickness. So, oh, you know what? Before I do that, let me back up. Yeah, okay. So I'm going to be more careful about adding my edge loops, because I'm only going to add a few at first. This one and this one. So with those, actually maybe one more close to each one of these. Okay. So the reason I'm being more careful is because I don't want to have to move as many edge loops. I want to move as few as possible. So the innermost edge loop and then the outermost edge loop, those are going to be the, let's say those are the edges of my cream cheese. So the rest of it is cream cheese. I'm going to hit W to move this stuff up. And you know, cream cheese isn't perfectly symmetrical like that. But for now, I'm just going to hold that. But now now that I've moved that stuff up, I've given it a little bit of thickness. Now I can add a couple more edge loops. Maybe here and here. Oops. I'm going to undo that. I don't want that one. There we go. All right. Maybe a couple more. Who knows? All right. So now that I have more geometry, I'm going to go back to object mode. And I'm going to start sculpting this cream cheese so it looks fluffy and less symmetrical, less geometric. So sculpt geometry tool. And you can be as random as you want with this. I'm going to turn this way down. The opacity needs to be way down. Oops, that's not what I wanted. There we go. And when I say way down, usually like 0.004 or, you know, really small is good. Sometimes I say way down and my students only go to like 0.1. You can go even further. And, you know, you want to test it first and see if that's good enough or that's too far. So I'm going to use the pull tool and make my brush smaller. Oh, that's you can see that's way too much. So I need to make it even smaller. Maybe I'm just going to add another 0 in there. There we go. And you have a lot of control if you just do it a really small value. And I'll look at it and maybe some of it will get really bumpy. And I want to be careful not to paint the bagel part. That's why I raised it so I could just focus on the cream cheese part. And of course, cream cheese isn't slathered on perfectly with this perfectly rounded edge all the way around. So we can change that too, but I'm just kind of trying to make it feel random and not so even. And if you wanted to, you can go the other direction too. You can use the pull and kind of push it down a little bit in certain areas. And then maybe some of it you want to even it out, smooth it out a little bit. Maybe it went too far with some of it or whatever. So just kind of randomizing it. All right, so let's see what that looks like. That's not too bad. It looks like it doesn't look like cream cheese to me. It looks like jelly. So if you wanted to change the this outer edge loop and maybe the inner edge loop so they're not quite so perfect, perfectly circular, maybe I'll go to the top view now and I'll just grab a couple of vertices and maybe I'll use the soft select tool again and set this way down, maybe 0.125. Yeah, maybe I'll grab a few of these and then I'll just drag them maybe in a little bit. And I probably need more geometry for this to feel right. I probably need a lot more geometry in the, but since I've already added a whole bunch, as far as like, I can't just use the torus settings. I have to actually create more edges. But yeah, you can push and pull stuff. I think, no, I don't have symmetry on. Yeah, maybe I would grab this guy and kind of pull it in. Maybe if it's closer on the inside, I would use a higher value, maybe 0.5 or something. And that just kind of makes it feel, yeah, you can make it feel like a spoon kind of smeared it a little bit. And I'm not really changing the edge that I was talking about, but just kind of making it feel like it's maybe been spread by some kind of utensil. And maybe even after I've done this, I'll see new geometry that I can maybe pull up. And like out here, maybe I'll pull some of this up. So you're just getting a really uneven surface is what I'm looking for, more random. Yeah. You want to add some chives or something on there. Yep. How's that? Is that a good bagel? Does that make you hungry?
Yeah.
All right. Anything else? All right. So for the sake of time, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, and then we're going to take a look at everybody's work. So I'll stop it here.